Guess we're being recorded.
Yeah.
All right. Good to go.
All right. Do you know everybody already? I already got you.
Yeah,
So I'm
yeah.
guessing you already are good. So I'm Jason Ball with Rowe. I'm the new lead for the planning department with Doug retiring. Doug's actual official retirement.
You can't do that when you're 48. God bless you.
Doug's official retirement date from Rowe, actually, his last full-time day is this Friday. But he's going to continue to work on, stay on kind of part-time and help us in special projects. And so if we are lucky enough to receive this work, this is one of those projects that he'd stay on work with, just given his long history with the township. So we have a quick little presentation to run through, but I think feel free to be informal, so feel free to stop us and ask questions.
All right, so this is who Rowe is. We have one office in South Carolina, but generally we're a Michigan firm. We've been a Michigan firm for 60 years, and our headquarters is in Flint, and that's where the planning department is located. But we have offices all over the place these days. As most of you folks know, we have a wide range of services that we provide, and the nice thing about the various services is it allows us to bring people in for assistance. Like if we have a surveying issue, we have a GIS issue, we have a landscape plan issue, landscape architecture issue, or an engineering issue. We've got staff that can come in and help us address those as part of the master plan process. And this is the team. Everyone else doesn't have gray hair, and it's an experienced team. Don't let that fool you. I think we could provide with all of the assistance that the project would require.
Yeah, we're working with Doug and Lauren on the Parks and Rec plan.
Yep.
There you go. Again, as far as qualifications, one of the things that we can say is we've been working with you guys for a long time. The first project I worked on was the 1999 master plan, and then we did an update in 2002, I think, in 2005. We wrote the zoning ordinance, and then I served as zoning administrator for 15 years. So I think we have a pretty good feel of a lot of the issues that the township has, but we wouldn't be walking in here assuming we know everything, because communities change, issues arise that you're not aware of, and especially in these past few years with the pandemic and stuff like that. There are a lot of things I'm sure that are different from when I was around.
So I guess the other piece of qualifications I'll just brag about is I actually had my wedding reception in this. So I don't know that
Well, that
anybody
should
else
do it.
will be able to.
Actually, I can say that.
Oh, can you really? Well, you're not.
Sorry.
On the work, so. But it's the first time I've been in the building since 2008, so that's kind of fun. Like we mentioned, we're currently assisting with the updates to the Parks and Recreation Plan, so that does allow us to really feel good about kind of hitting the ground running on the master plan in terms of understanding existing conditions, some background data, those kinds of things. Some of that work we can bring into this, and we've made some of those assumptions in our project. And then Scott Haymeyer, the engineer on the project, was obviously a planning commissioner here for a long time, and CB consulting on the civil engineering work, thinking about the impact of potential new water service and things from the township. And Scott certainly knows the township extremely well. So right now, in our planning department, we have 58 active clients. About half of those, actually exactly half of those, are townships. And of the total, about 90 clients, about 75 of those are either rural or suburban. So, like most planning departments, certainly in Michigan, most of our units of government are rural or suburban. And so for us, this kind of work with townships like Fenton Township that are kind of a mix of some rural areas, urban areas, rural areas, and a lot of suburban is core to what we do. Do a lot of work with Mundy Township, Flint Township, and other townships in Genesee County, and so we're really familiar with, sort of some of those dynamics, but also the unique kind of growth drivers you all have down here being so close to Oakland County. There's some unique things going on just in your geography and the great things you've been able to do in terms of demand for development that kind of make you unique compared to a lot of the rest of Genesee County, given where you are. So like I said, township master plans are kind of a core service to what we do. We've done many of them. We average about between 6 and 10 a year. So for us, our approach, and you certainly know this based on working with Doug for so long, is to build strong relationships with our clients, regardless of what great plan or process we set up for the master plan. Over the course of a year, something is going to go wrong. Something's going to change. There's going to be some sort of adjustment we have to make kind of midstream, and that's fine with us. We kind of expect that. And given our location and where we are, it would be really easy for us to adjust. So if we're doing, and we'll talk about public engagement in a minute, but as we're doing that public engagement work, if there's some event or something that pops up, so it's a really great opportunity to let the public know about the master plan, we can be flexible and be there or support that. We don't have to worry about driving in from a long distance or worrying about big additional costs, just given our location and again, kind of our ease to get here to the township. So in retailing our approach and budget to meet our clients' needs, that goes without saying. And then for us doing as many of these township master plans as we do, we have some processes and things in place that allow us to kind of run through the background data, the existing land use analysis, some of those more technical things pretty quickly. So we can spend more time really thinking about the nuts and bolts of what are the goals you want to set, how do you want your future land use to really be laid out, and give a lot of detail, not just the future land use, but also how is that going to be implemented through your zoning ordinance and your future development. So that reflects what we hear in public input, but also for you all as planning commissioners, you can feel really good about the master plan serving as a basis for decisions that you make. So ultimately, that's what it is, right? It's the basis for all your zoning ordinances and your decisions. In the request for proposal, public participation was a major point of emphasis. So in our proposal, we identified 4 separate sort of points of public participation, but social media is just kind of always included. So I know the township has a Facebook page now that has some couple hundred followers, and so certainly as we go through the process, we'd be helping ghostwriter give posts to the township to put on the Facebook page about an event, or here's a survey we're posting, kind of working with you all to do that. So that kind of underlies all of it, just getting the word out. We proposed 2 different public attitude surveys. The first is really more of just saying the master plan update has happened. So a really short, no more than 5 or 6 question kind of survey that can be in paper here at the hall or other key locations, but online. And that's just to get some general feedback and also to get people to share their contact information if they want to get notified about other things going on. But just really to say, hey, the master plan update is happening. There's opportunities to engage. Give us some basic, feedback on what your primary concerns or assets you'd like to the township. And after that, there's a more detailed survey. That'll be 20 to 30 questions, but again, we try not to make those terribly long. We dive into some more specific things you want to know from residents. Then we do a set of 2 different visioning sessions. All of our public engagement, we assume 2 sessions. So one, I'm assuming being here at the township hall, and a second could be here, or another one being somewhere else. Because what tends to work best on public engagement is we can find opportunities to go where people already are. Instead of making them come to us, we'll have much more success in terms of reaching more people.
All right, so jumping in here.
Yeah.
So you guys are familiar with the township. What would be a good example of one of those other events that would make sense to do a public participation event?
So public participation in this, actually, we have it scheduled in spring and summer. So if you have, when's Fenton's Apple Festival? It was a couple of weeks back. Yeah, so it's fall. But if you have other things going on in the township, whether it's a festival day or you've got I should know this, but so the soccer fields, the Deer Park soccer fields, right? It'd be an easy place to put out a set of surveys and have a table one Saturday that says, hey, the master plan update's happening to Fenton Township resident. Here's opportunities to participate. For the visioning sessions, those, schools work great,
Mhm.
libraries work great. Churches, anything else really is just thinking about both time and geography to try to have different options for folks to participate. So instead of doing everything like, 7 o'clock on a Wednesday night, there's some other way that we can reach, particular populations. We want to make sure that- And I would just say with public engagement overall, we try to be really flexible with our scope. Because we can come up, like I said, with a great plan on this, and we may get into it and find out based on our survey results, and as we're kind of going through it, that either something's working really great, we're gonna do more of, or something we thought was gonna work really well isn't. And so, we kind of bake in some of that assumed flexibility to be able to shift or do a little more, do a little less of each thing as we work through it. Like I said, over the course of the year, something's gonna go different than what we planned.
Yeah, we had, when we did the first master plan, we actually had, a visioning session scheduled. And then, a mobile home park got, proposed. We expected maybe 20 or 30 people at the visioning session. We had like 125. It was great, except for the fact that all people wanted to talk about was how they didn't want a mobile home park.
Well, I think we have a similar hook for public participation this time, dealing with short-term rentals. Before the pandemic, we didn't have any complaints,
Yeah,
but now it seems like we're getting complaints weekly
oh, really?
on them. And, our stance has always been, well, let's see what the state does. Because if they're gonna say we can't regulate it, why are we gonna, waste our time?
Yep.
But we're getting to a point where we can't wait,
Yeah.
much longer. And so, Vince and I have talked about looking at it over the winter.
Mhm.
But, we will have the ability to send out notices, and that will get people in the door.
Yeah,
The legislation that's been proposed, is, it passed the House, went to the Senate, sat there for 18 months. And then last week it got moved through committee. But it didn't get to the floor of the Senate. So there is the potential that if anything's gonna happen regarding that, it's gonna be, this, November, December during the lame duck. And, so you should know, because if it doesn't happen, then it's probably gonna be another 18 months before it does happen.
When I went through the House, was it for the state to control the issue
It was a very-
or let the local communities address it?
It was a very simple amendment that said, in essence, that communities could not require any special approval for someone to rent their property for a period of less than 30 days. But that communities still could enforce noise ordinances and other things. So,
you can still require licenses, so you can't, kind of treats them like family daycare homes, you sort of says they're residential, you can't, preclude
Yeah, I
them.
think that's the perfect
But-
example.
Yeah, you have to, you can regulate, but you can't exclude
or prohibit.
or prohibit.
Yeah, and that was the big thing, is that there are a lot of communities out there that said, well, based on our definition of a single family home, is a family, and a family is defined as a non-commercial relationship. Renting someone your house for a short-term basis is a rental, is a commercial relationship, and therefore not a single family use of the property. So that's, for a lot of people, that's basically been all they've done. They haven't amended their zoning ordinance or adopted new regulations, they just relied on that. But again, everyone's been sitting on pins and needles, over what, if the state's gonna pass that law or not. And Michigan Association of Planning, MTA, MML have all provided some suggested ways of making it a little bit more local control friendly. And there's been discussion, but in the end, it's the original bill, as I understand it, that's now on the Senate or.
Sorry to take you off
Oh, no,
tangent
you're
there. I
okay.
was curious. He's giving him
Yeah,
left and right.
Yeah.
Use like yours with really nice inland lakes.
Oh, yeah, prime
Yeah.
example right there.
Yeah, no kidding. So then otherwise, in terms of public engagement, we also propose some stakeholder focus groups. So that's, based on our visioning session, based on the surveys, we're going to start, and based on work with the planning commission, we're going to have some sense of kind of where we're headed in terms of goals and objectives, and what are the things the township wants to accomplish. And then be able to take that back with some of your own sort of local experts and officials and say, okay, how does this all feel to you all? Do you have concerns about this? Is this feasible? So, working with your economic development folks, maybe some of your home ownership groups, certainly local elected officials and others that have kind of a stake in the township, business owners, getting their feedback on, here's what we're hearing, here's where we're headed. What do you guys think?
I know the lake groups are, have been very, very involved in the planning process.
And, and then closing that out with two different master plan open houses. So they're being able to set up, boards in a big room, allow people to come in, review goals and objectives, maps, key things that would be in the master plan and give their feedback. And then after all of that, the planning commission goes through, the mandated adoption process with the state and public hearings and all those kinds of things. But this process, at least we've found, and this is kind of pretty robust public engagement, gives you a good sense as a planning commission, where's everybody else stand in the township? What's the kind of, how do you read the wind a little bit and get a sense of where folks are headed? And then you feel pretty good about devising goals that at least are going to be consistent with what you're hearing, or maybe inconsistent, but you're not surprised. You're deciding to go a slightly different direction from what folks are. So for us, we won't go through the whole scope of work, but in our proposal, some of the key pieces for us, one of my pet peeves, I used to do a lot of data analysis and research, and we have a tendency in master plans as planners to give a bunch of socioeconomic data and then say, okay, great, that's where it is, and then we move on. So if we're going to spend all that time and effort looking at, demographics and, breaking households into different kind of segments, really trying to understand, so what does all that mean? And how are we going to make this be relevant to our future land use map, to our goals and objectives, really tying this into the plan for the township, instead of just saying, here's a bunch of data, now we're going to go on and go to something else. The other unique opportunity you had, since you are doing this update, so, at your 5-year update timeframe, it's a good opportunity to look at land use. So you have good existing land use data from 2018. So we can look at that and say, okay, what's changed as of 2022 for 2023? And that helps you kind of target where are those areas of the township that might be under development pressure, or you see some of that land use change happening and maybe focusing in on some of those big 3-year future plans. Everything we'll do will be parcel by parcel. So when we're done, if there are any attributes that we create related to future land use or other characteristics, you all can take that and plug it back into your BSNA if you want. And so if there's ever a question about, well, what's the future land use on this or that parcel, we'll have it cleared sort of one-to-one. Talked a lot about our flexible approach to public engagement. We'll assume all the meetings are with the planning commission and going through that. Depending on how you all want to do that as a planning commission, we can either put it on one side or another, your regular planning commission meeting, or set up special planning commission meetings. I know certainly this is in addition to your day jobs or night job as planning commissioners.
Well, we get paid more.
Yeah. Vince already said he would. Well, so one thing we know we have to do is, starting in the new year, we're only 2 meetings a month.
Yeah.
So we're gonna be the second and fourth Thursday of every month.
Yeah. And what we've had other communities do, we're just wrapping up a master plan with the city of Caro, who has a similar dynamic, is we picked one of those two to be kind of the master plan.
Right.
And so, if there's something else that really had to get on the agenda, great. But in general, that one was the master plan meeting. And that way everybody knew, and you were able to get things, it's everybody a week in advance, give you time to review it and kind of be ready for those meetings.
And in the previous master planning projects, especially the last two, the township board wanted to be involved, at least to the extent that I think in the second one, what we did is we had an initial group meeting with everyone, and just kind of lay out what's going to happen, what the time frame is, so everyone's on the same page. The township board isn't suddenly surprised that, oh, you're updating the master plan? Yeah, I remember something about that. And then usually like halfway through or towards the end, having another meeting where they're involved as well. They can ask questions and feel comfortable, so that if they assume final authority for adoption of the plan, which is their right, you don't get a situation where suddenly they want to make 27 changes because this is only the first time they've seen it.
Yeah, so in our case, they're fully aware of what's going on. Right? We just updated the Township corridor plan, based on the water coming in. We're working on getting improvement to the bridge over Thompson Road. So they understand that we're sort of in this planning phase. We need to get ahead of, development and changes that are coming. They have been kept, for the Township corridor plan, they were kept in the loop while it was going on. Right? I gave them updates, right? So I think that would be a similar thing, this, for the master plan, I agree, right? We don't want to get to the end and just toss it out and start all over again.
Exactly.
And master plans can get stuck in this really ugly endless loop between the board and the planning commission, and nobody wants to be there.
I had that happen in Ortonville.
Yeah.
The village council and the planning commission were not on the same page on anything. Took them 2 years after I left before they finally adopted the master plan.
Yeah.
And that joint kickoff meeting was assumed in our proposal. We always do,
Mhm.
even if it doesn't pan out that way, or just to have some board members there, if it can't be everybody. But that's a really valuable opportunity just to kind of get everybody on the same page, but also if there's anything we also do a lot of training for our communities, and I'm sure you've experienced that with Doug. If there's any things coming up, maybe at that time, the short-term rental thing is happening, we want to have a conversation about it, but it's another chance to do kind of a quick update, or are there any issues that you're having that we can add kind of as a quick training or refresher as part of that. Last night at is just for us, there's, you have your goals and objectives in your master plan, which can be, for the horizon of your plan, 20 years. Then we also really like to do what we call an implementation plan, which is, all right, we're going to update this thing, or we're going to review it again in 5 years. Of all these goals and objectives we identified, what are the things we really want to be able to be sure we're making movement on over between now and our next 5-year. And so for those, usually for us, they're strategies or tactics or action items, whatever you want to call them, is identifying who's responsible for getting that thing done, and if it needs funding, where is the funding going to come from? And then as a planning commission, what that allows you to do is in your annual report at the end of every year is to say, okay, we made this plan in our master plan. We got through year 1, we got through 2023, what got done, what didn't get done, and why. And that's a good kind of accountability mechanism for everybody. For the planning commission, it communicates to the board, hey, if you want this thing to get done, you've got to dedicate resources. Or we're really having issues with this one strategy we identified because we're getting lots of pushback, and maybe we want to think about changing direction. That way it kind of stays top of mind for everybody. You can track progress over time. And then this is just, again, the timeline we included in the proposal. It's a year-long process, assuming we start in November, and then ending in October of 2023. And so again, that can flex a little bit depending on how things go, but in general for us, we find trying to do a master plan in anything less than a year is really difficult, because you've got basically a 2-month window at the end for public comment. And so once you bake in time, you're really only looking at 8 to 9 months of actual work. So anything shorter than a year can be done, but it's hard to do that and do robust public debate. I can't take credit for that. Brandon marketing. That's our overview. We're happy to answer any questions y'all have.
One of the things we mentioned in some of our prior meetings is we have probably a majority of planners that are still went through the prior master plan, so it's not a brand new set of objectives and everything else. We're really trying to improve, adjust, and do that type of thing. So I think you'll have good engagement from the commission. And I think the trustees, I think Vince is involved, he'll be an active participant. So I think those concerns about communicating and working together, I think those are more in place than they ever have been before. So those are all good things.
Those are very good things.
Yeah. And so otherwise, we'll just tell the trustees that if they have any questions to keep them.
Don't be back.
Yeah, be careful. This whole thing's being recorded.
Totally kidding, but I think we're gonna be
a very active
That's
collective group. Yeah.
That's good.
So, one of the things that we've all recognized, Roll's a different place than it was, when last master plan was done.
Mhm.
What kind of trends are you seeing due to COVID in land use plans? That maybe we didn't have to address for before.
Yeah, I guess I can speak to that, and Doug, you can add to it too. I think what we've seen for communities is more desire for flexibility within reason, right? But I think during COVID, we all had to take a sort of different look at what it meant to be a home occupation or work from home, or how restaurants or businesses operate in terms of drive-throughs and takeouts and things that used to be regulated very differently. And we went through COVID and said, well, maybe we don't have to regulate those quite the way that we did before. So I think specifically as a result of COVID, it's been how do we be more flexible while still being sure that we're controlling any of the sort of associated negative impacts within use. So, maybe being more flexible in terms of what we allow for uses, but still being focused on design standards or special use review, being sure that we're not creating issues for neighbors, but also allowing creativity with how folks use their property or make money off of their business. Because so many folks had to really quickly pivot, and I think everybody's kind of under the understanding that that wasn't such a bad thing. We should allow for that when we can.
Do you see more or less demand for office or retail or whatever use out there? Do you see some fluctuations there?
It's so hard to tell right now, given the sort of national state of the national economy, interest rates and financing, and everything else. Obviously retail demand for retail and office plummeted after COVID. I haven't seen a site plan for office space or a new building for things including office in a year.
Other than like a dental office. or
A
something
single
like that.
user.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Right.
Medical, dental, those sorts of things. Sure, there's still lots of demand for that, but a typical, accounting
Yeah.
office kind of function. I don't-
Lawyer.
Yeah,
You don't see the developers putting up a professional office park per se and leasing it out.
yeah. I mean, and I think the other impact has been just there's so much demand for housing. Right, and so we've even seen a lot of communities where, maybe formerly there was a prohibition on doing, housing on the first floor in a downtown area. Look at, how can we allow for housing if it's not on the street, but it's in the back of a building, but how do you chop up some of those commercial spaces that are going vacant and use them for housing, because there's such demand for, housing.
One of the things that I noted in some of my conversations with old compatriots is the fact that they're looking at the world and seeing a step back from globalization, that it just doesn't make sense. If you look at the way things are packed together and not being moved and not being handled properly in various geographical areas, it puts a real focus back on build American, process your stuff yourself in your operation. I don't know what that really means in the end, but it's something that I'm aware of, and I'm sure I'm not the only person that's aware of it.
Yeah. Well, to me, anyway, that comes back to how do you provide land use regulations that control impacts that allow for flexibility in use, right? I mean, we have, in a lot of townships we work with, one of the most common sort of sticky situations we end up with is somebody that has some space and had a side hustle during COVID that is turning into a full-time job, and they want to add on at home and do it there, but can they, and how does that pan out? You've got different demands here, but probably some of the same dynamics going on in different portions of the township. And so that's not a bad thing at all, right? As long as there's not going to be 20 cars in the parking lot and, people coming in all days and times and traffic and that kind of thing. So, thinking about how do you allow flexibility with use, but controlling some of those offsite impacts, design standards and those kinds of things to ensure that you're, maintaining the quality of life of residents, but also allowing folks to do whatever it is that's going to work for them. Yeah.
How have you guys sort of planned or identified need for affordable housing, and what affordable housing means for each community, right? Because I don't necessarily know if the idea of affordable housing in Fenton is the, what it is in Mundy or,
Yeah.
and identifying what's missing and how to properly plan for what's missing.
Well,
And we wrestled with that in the last
No,
master plan, big time,
Yeah.
so.
Go ahead.
Doug, I know what you're gonna say.
Well, yeah, I mean, Monday night I was at the city of Flushing and we presenting to the city council because the planning commission had just held a public hearing on the master plan. And we had gotten remarks prior to the public hearing from the council. Not an individual, these are all these comments. And some of them was, what is this about affordable housing? What does affordable housing mean? What do you, and the planning commission was kind of dealing with that as well, in one survey we did, the public identified that they really felt like there was a need for public health, housing, or excuse me, affordable housing. But then in another, what we did our open house, we proposed some alternatives like tiny houses and zero lot lines and things like that, and they didn't like any of them. They didn't like any of the solutions to provide affordable housing. But they thought, well, we want to be able to have housing so our children can live here too, kind of thing. So that's where the rubber meets the road. And in the end, I think the master plan is going to say, well, in the big scheme of things, in the city of Flushing, our housing is generally affordable. And if you like to take a look at the overall market area, but we know that there's things can change, and but as part of our 5-year review, we're going to compare again incomes and housing and see whether or not we need to implement some of these strategies that we thought of, but most people view it as a bitter pill, at least with regards to the next door to them.
I think part of the challenge with affordable housing too is historically we've done such a bad job of it. I mean, there are other places that, not everywhere, but other places that have done a much better job of providing for affordable housing in ways that you don't drive by and go, oh, there's the subsidized housing. I think when we say affordable housing, a lot of times that's what we mean, right? And so I think it's important when we talk about affordable housing, just to say what we're really talking about and what it is we want to provide for and what it is that we want to avoid. The other thing is the township is, I mean, frankly, you've got a lot more area than a city does. And so you may have locations in the township or providing some of those options for housing that maybe is a little higher density or, more of an emphasis on mixed income might be more appropriate than say, next to a lake with $1.5 million homes on it. And so, I think there's a lot of nuance to that, and that's one of those things that as a planning commission, as we think through future land use, you're really diving into what are those solutions to affordable housing. I was just part of a group from Michigan Association of Planning that wrote a guide about, that ends with 15 ways to basically provide for more flexibility in zoning ordinances as it comes to housing. And, the reality there is all those things are along a spectrum, right? You can everything from, permitting accessory dwelling units in certain places to, incentivizing or requiring a certain percentage of new housing to be set aside for affordability. And so most communities fall somewhere in between on that spectrum. So identifying kind of based on the public engagement, where do you fit? And then what are some strategies and things you can implement that are going to be appropriate for you? And I think to Doug's point too, all of this stuff is so subject to change. Before COVID, we didn't really have this pressing housing issue to the extent that we do now, right? So we had this huge increase in housing demand or drop in housing supply that got things kind of out of whack, and so we've been dealing with that. But 5 years from now, that may not be the case. And so whenever you do these things, it's important to say, what are those assumptions we're basing this plan on? And if those assumptions change, maybe this isn't as relevant anymore.
Well, our last go around, tiny houses took up a lot of time.
That very same thing happened, like,
Yeah.
oh, that's not our idea. Right.
Well, I think you brought up a good point though. Right, a lot of it is market, right? I call it affordable housing, but it's entry level housing, and what entry level for the community is different than what it is, in a different community. But we also talked about, these governmental loans are imaginary to begin with.
Yeah.
And all right, you may not be able to have an affordable house, in Fenton, but you can in the city of London,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then what's really the difference, right? We're all part of the same greater community.
And you know, you can enhance it with architect and design. It doesn't have to look like a barracks.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it can be a gated community and then there's, the density is just a lot greater and the economy of scale brings some pricing down.
And like you said, and that's one of those things that you can, you know, bake in your master plan and then gives you basis as you think about making changes on your zoning ordinance that either incentivizes or allows for, whether it's, you know, an accessory dwelling unit above a garage on a lake, or it's, you know, tiny homes, but, you know, other options for affordable housing.
Well, and the thing is that, one of the things we found in the last few years is that, when I started, you know, 40 years ago and working with communities, the push was always, we need to have a bigger minimum dwelling size, because we want to have large homes so that we have all this high value housing. And, in the last about 4 or 5 years, people said, you know, I would really like to be able to find a place where I could buy a 900 square foot single family home or attached home, you know, because my wife doesn't want to do you know, clean a 2,000 square foot home anymore, and you know, but
Well, the yard.
Yeah.
And
yeah, exactly. And so we're seeing community members, particularly where they have a significant number of older folks, saying, yeah, maybe reducing the square footage from, you know, we again, in the city of Flushing, we talked about going down to like 800 square feet. That ended up being a bridge too far, but it, you know, it's another way of helping to make housing affordable is by those, you know, again, zero lot lines, you know, reducing those things that add to the cost, the width of the lots, the amount of green spaces required, the minimum square footage, other improvements that may not be necessary, you know, for the overall quality of life, so.
you know, it's a little one, but even if you have multifamily housing, reducing parking requirements can make a huge difference in terms of what it costs to do a development, because it takes up space and parking is expensive to maintain.
Then you gotta you gotta maintain it, you gotta plow the snow, you gotta repave it.
Phil, you got anything?
Used to be a board member for the shelter of Flint, and they built 400 unit affordable housing. That seemed to work out pretty well. And they were nice developments. So. That was that's kind of. So.
Yeah, before working for Rowe, I did 5 years of work in nonprofit stuff and Flint. The shelter does fantastic.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
They
It
do
was,
really good work. And
yeah,
I think, you know, so much of that is about context too.
right,
I mean,
exactly, right.
It's just, it's where does it fit in the community and how do you identify the right places? And I think, like you pointed out, architecturally, how do you kind of provide some guardrails around that so that, you know, it fits with the community, it's gonna limit off-site impact. But still provide for some of those options that fit with your community. Like you said, affordable in Fenton Township is not affordable in Mundy Township or other places in the county or the surrounding area. It's gonna be a little different for everybody.
All right, so we are making a recommendation on Thursday. Goes from the township board on Tuesday. So we are looking to hit the ground running, so
There you go.
Sounds
we'll
great.
follow up with you guys on Friday and let you know what the process is, what's going on, and keep you in the loop.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all. If you have any questions in the meantime, don't hesitate to reach out.
Appreciate that.
Jason, nice to meet you.
You too.